Hates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wings for freedom. Those were the words that Volodymyr Zelenskyy told us in Westminster Hall yesterday. But just how far can the UK and our international allies go? We'll explore that question, as well as the cabinet reshuffle, the Whitehall restructuring. Is there an enormous oversight in one of those departments? Stick around to find out after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Around 70 members of UK International Search and Rescue have arrived in Turkey. The team of volunteers includes firefighters and medics. Nearly 16,000 people are now known to have died after Monday's devastating earthquakes in the south of the country and northern Syria. The Disasters Emergency Committees coordinated a rapid response by 14 UK charities, including the British Red Cross and Oxfam. The government says it will match any donations made by the public. Volodymyr Zelenskyy is joining an EU summit in Brussels today to lobby leaders to provide more weapons to Ukraine in the fight against Russia. He travelled with French President Emmanuel Macron after a brief stop in Paris, one that followed his surprise visit to the UK. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak said nothing's off the table when it comes to providing fighter jets to Ukraine. Strike action by firefighters has been put on hold while union members consider an increased pay offer. Members of the Fire Brigades Union held last-minute talks with bosses yesterday after rejecting an offer of a 5% increase. The union says it's considering a revised 7% pay rise backdated to July last year and another 5% from this July. They'll now ballot members on the proposals. And the Prince and Princess of Wales are visiting Cornwall today in their first official joint trip to the county since taking on their new roles as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. William and Kate will visit the harbour town of Falmouth to learn about the county's naval heritage, as well as meeting members of the local community. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News Now. It's back to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in Brussels today after his landmark visit to the United Kingdom yesterday. During an historic address to Parliament, he thanked Britain, Rishi and Boris for providing military and economic support throughout the war.
Great Britain, you extended your helping hand when the world had not yet come to understand how to react. Boris, you got others united when it seemed absolutely impossible. Thank you. Thank you, Rishi. Thank you very much for this powerful defensive step for tank assistance. Thank you. The coalition of long-range missiles is the latest of all. It will allow us to make the evil completely retreat from our country by destroying its headways deep in the occupied territories.
It's hard to overstate the atmosphere in that hall. Standing shoulder to shoulder next to those MPs and peers, both houses united listening to that joint address from the President of Ukraine. He was standing there in the footsteps of where Nelson Mandela had stood before, where Charles de Gaulle had stood before, and he was making that call. That call he's now taking for those fighter jets and longer-range missiles to 27 EU heads of government, all at once this morning. Yesterday, Downing Street said it's open to sending jets to Ukraine, but sees this as a longer-term project. Well, how feasible is it? I'm delighted to be joined now by the chair of the Defence Committee, Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, first of all, thank you for joining us this morning. The government seems to have a bit of a holding position, a bit of an ambiguous position towards sending jets. We're in an exploratory phase, but we're committed to training Ukrainian pilots. Does this make any sense?
Well, it does. It shows the perhaps cautious journey that we've been on since the start of this Ukrainian crisis, since the invasion itself. I mean, firstly, just to touch on President Zelenskyy's speech, this had all the gravitas of a wartime leader. I think there was genuine appreciation, gratitude for what the UK has done in taking us on that journey, pushing the envelope of what the West can do without us losing control of the escalatory ladder, without us being spooked by Russia's rhetoric, or Putin say he may resort to nuclear weapons. But as you were implying, he came with a clear message. Thank you for that, but I need more. If we're going to conclude this in 2020,
Oh, well, we'll try and get that connection back to Tobias Ellwood as soon as we possibly can. But it is interesting to note exactly that sort of journey that we've been on as a country. First, providing those Javelin missiles, those NLAWs as well, that President Zelenskyy name-checked specifically in his speech yesterday. The United Kingdom was one of those first countries to provide support before the war. And that's something that President Zelenskyy really did emphasise.
Ukraine will be happy to then
as well.
invest in.
Tobias Ellwood, it sounds like you're back there. We lost connection with you just so briefly, but you were talking
the Super
about
Tucano aircraft, for example, used by air forces around the world. It can fire all the same air-to-air, air-to-ground missiles, Paveway, Hellfire, Brimstone, for example, flies at 600 kilometers an hour. The big difference is it's got a propeller on the front. And, you know, RAF pilots don't like things with propellers anymore. They want to go faster and higher. But you can train pilots on it very, very quickly. It's far cheaper.
Tobias, we just missed a little
variants bit. 60 of these. It's a variant that have been mothballed, formerly used by the RAF. So we could get those out, get the training started. That could be our initial contribution. But we need to work with our allies on recognizing that if we don't do this soon, Russia, who has an ability to endure hardship far greater than ours, they will toughen this out, drag it out for months, for years, hoping that we will, get bored or lose faith and then actually stop providing that support to Ukraine. That is what Russia's plan is. So all important that we lean in and help President Zelenskyy as he calls to arms.
Now, I hope you can hear me. I think we had a bit of communication problem just there during that answer. I can't hear you now, I'm afraid. You can't hear me now? Well, we'll try and get that sorted. And in the meantime, let's refer to the words. Let's refer to the words of the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who put out a statement yesterday on all of this. It read, "It's time to give Ukrainians the extra equipment they need to defeat Putin and restore peace to Ukraine. That means longer-range missiles and artillery. It means more tanks. It means planes. We've got more than 100 Typhoon jets. We have more than 100 Challenger 2 tanks. The best single use for any of them now for the protection of the Ukrainians is to deploy them for the protection of the Ukrainians, not least because that's how we guarantee our own long-term security." Those are the words of the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who, of course, has been out and about, not just in this country, pressuring this government, but also in the United States, talking to leaders on Capitol Hill about getting that support to Ukraine as well. His message is simple: get this war over sooner and you save money. It might seem counterintuitive, but giving the equipment now, putting in the investment now, could save money in the long run, providing this war is led to a speedy conclusion. I believe we have Tobias Ellwood back now after those communications troubles. Tobias, you were saying that that our Typhoon jets might not be the most significant. I think we've got a few problems there. We might just have to leave Tobias there and we'll move on to our next topic, because I spoke to some members of Parliament after the address from President Zelenskyy yesterday, getting their thoughts on that incredibly historic moment.
It was a quite amazing speech. It was beautifully constructed and it made his argument so powerfully. Some of the lines were really terrific about how our king was a pilot and every pilot in Ukraine is a king. I thought was just one of those brilliant lines that emphasises what Ukraine wants and needs. Well, Boris remains a very important political figure and what he has to say is taken very seriously and he remains a great friend of Ukraine. But the key is, a year ago, it just wouldn't have happened if Boris hadn't united the Western world, which took a lot of diplomacy and political skill to support Ukraine and send armaments and to impose sanctions on Russia. And that was a great political achievement. But what President Zelenskyy has shown is that he is so utterly worth the support that he has been given. What a great man, what an impressive speech. Thinking back of all the speeches that there have been in Westminster Hall, and this was something the Lord Speaker alluded to, the one from Zelenskyy must go down as one of the greatest. Again, wasn't that beautifully put? The last time I came, you gave me tea. Now I'm coming and I want you to give me wings. I just thought that was such a good appeal to the whole of what you might call the political nation, that most MPs and most peers were there, members of the Cabinet, the Prime Minister, listening to this appeal. Now, he has made that appeal. I think it will have a lot of support within the country at large. There are obvious difficulties and risk of escalation and so on, but his appeal, I thought, was extremely powerful. Well, I've said before, and there's now a paper that's been issued by the Centre for Brexit Studies explaining how this would not have happened had the UK been tied into the European Union. If we had still been bound by the concept of sincere cooperation, we wouldn't have been able to give the global leadership that we have done. And I think without Boris's leadership, without the UK's leadership, the US wouldn't have felt that it had momentum behind it to act. The European Union was sitting on its hands. So I think this has been tremendously important, and Boris in the UK showed considerable leadership.
Really interesting there from Jacob Rees-Mogg that being outside the European Union, and particularly outside this commitment to sincere cooperation within the members of that organisation, we were able to push for more from the outside, perhaps take on a bigger international role from the outside. Perhaps it's no wonder that London was the first European city that Zelenskyy visited outside of his own country since the start of that war. Well, I also spoke to the former leader of the Conservative Party, Ian Duncan Smith, yesterday.
It was a remarkable speech, very moving, and at times quite funny, really. He didn't miss the opportunity not just to come here for applause and to talk about the links with the UK, which I think is right. We were the first to come out, support, and drive the others to support, and he gave credit for that. But I thought the most interesting touch was at the end, when he produced his shopping list, and did it in such a delicate and funny way that I don't know how the British government can resist. Aircraft for Ukraine, wings for victory, great lines from a great man. I have to say, very moving indeed. The UK had to suffer bombs, the Blitz here, and this building that part got destroyed in all of it, and you know, the UK stood alone, Britain stood alone, and it was from our stand that eventually the rest of the world was able to get rid of Germany's Nazism and end in peace. And I think the parallels are not missed by him. They have stood alone, and it was the UK that came to them first. I don't say this in any way to disparage our allies and friends on the continent and the States, but it's just to say that he recognised that, and with that and with the others coming to the fore, that's begun a huge alliance, but I think the UK played a very signal part in that.
Ian Duncan Smith speaking there yesterday, just following that speech from Volodymyr Zelenskyy. But back to domestic affairs now. Since the Conservative leadership contest over the summer, growth has become a watchword within Parliament. The Conservative Growth Group, spearheaded by former Cabinet Ministers Simon Clarke and Ranil Jayawardena, is establishing itself as a powerful caucus, meeting weekly every Wednesday, pushing for pro-growth policy. What's Sunak's answer to this? Well, science and technology. Number 10 has said that the new Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, or DSIT in Whitehall speak, is key to delivering economic growth. But can it? And what will it look like? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Tom Whipple, the science editor at The Times. And Tom, it's been a while since we've had a department focused on science and technology. Does it matter that this is now an independent, standalone beast within Whitehall?
I think it's a signal. A lot of scientists have been calling for this for a while, to have a seat at the cabinet table. It's one of these things where science kind of feels like a slightly spurned lover. It's wheeled out, and the prime ministers talk about how wonderful it is and how proud they are of it, but then slightly feels taken for granted. Because it doesn't have this department, and it does get overlooked for various things. And so I think they're pleased that this is a statement of intent, and obviously we wait to see the details. We wait to see if it makes any difference, but it is at least action to match the rhetoric. If you're going to talk about science leading growth, if you're going to talk about us being a science superpower, and we do genuinely have world-class, world-leading, to use that awful phrase, science, then you need to make a symbol like this and just say, look, yeah, you are there, and you're as important as transport and all these other things.
What does it say that the person who has ended up leading this department isn't necessarily the first choice for Rishi Sunak? There was all sorts of reporting over the last couple of days that Sunak actually wanted Michael Gove, the great Whitehall reformer, to take on steering DSIT, but instead he chose to stay at the Levelling Up department. Should we read anything into that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess one of the things you read into it is that's a serious person chosen for the job. So that is a statement of intent if they wanted Michael Gove. I think people would say, well, look, it's nice that Michael Gove wants to stay in the department and do work. I mean, one of the problems with the science brief has been, we've had a lot of science ministers who haven't been cabinet ministers, to an extent, sometimes it's felt like this is a stepping stone to other things. And I think for the science community, what they'll be saying is, great, Michelle Donnellan, let's see what she does. But we don't want her to be thinking, well, this is my movement so that I can then go on to something else. This needs to be an end in itself. So I like the idea of cabinet ministers hanging around somewhere, having started to understand the brief.
And this is a brief that has been significantly beefed up. It's taken bits and bobs from the department that was digital, culture, media and sport. It's taken bits from what was business, energy and industrial strategy. It's sort of combining a lot together. What is actually the benefit that could come out of a more unified policy on science?
Well, there's something that people always talk about, and I think slightly over-egg in British science, which is this idea of the valley of the death. So you've got the amazing British science. If we want to caricature it, these brilliant, plucky British boffin brains come up with all of the stuff, and then some other country goes along and commercializes it. And actually, there's some truth in that, but nowhere near as much as people make out. But if you have the idea, right, we support the science, so we support the Cambridge biotech, but then part of this is also about saying, let's see how we commercialize it. Let's see how we turn that field just outside Cambridge that's doing almost nothing into a £500 million science park. So rather than just thinking British brains think up some nice equations, a more unified approach is absolutely what we need if this can be part of growth rather than just the intellectual edification of the British soul.
It's a really important point that you make there about the parts of this country that are genuinely world-leading on research. We've got 3 of the top 10 universities in the world here in this country, and yet they don't really have the space to grow. A recent assessment has shown that there is zero available lab space in Cambridge, and there's only a slight, tiny slither of lab space available in Oxford. I suppose it's impossible for this country to attract the brightest and the best investment and, turning science into actual practicable company growth if we don't have the space to do it in.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like there is an easy win to be had there. It's not just, the land around Cambridge, quite clearly there's massive investment that could be possible there if it was allowed. Also, transport. If you want to travel from Oxford to Cambridge, you have to get a bus that sort of goes on this magical mystery tour of Britain, and that seems quite insane, given that these are major powerhouses of growth and of the sort of strategy we want for the UK. So yeah, I think this is good news. I think there's some really easy, low-hanging fruit that a government could pick if it wanted to, and part of it would just be saying, maybe let's open it up a bit more to growth.
But what power will this new Secretary of State actually have here? Because, of course, planning policy remains with Michael Gove, remains at DLUC. Perhaps this is one of the reasons he didn't want to move, because ultimately, if any department wants to do anything in terms of building stuff in this country, they've got to go through him.
Yeah, you're right. We need what happens. One of the advantages of this is there's going to be someone sitting at the table alongside Michael Gove at an equal status in the cabinet who can make these arguments. And I think the logic of them is becoming overwhelming. The logic of thinking, we need to do something in the Oxford-Cambridge arc, and we need to do stuff in the north, levelling up as well. But the honest truth is this is where the growth seems to want to be, and this is where we've got all of these companies desperate to expand.
No, really, really interesting stuff there. I suppose the government can't really be telling companies, no, you must go there, because that company might, after all, just say, well, actually, I'll go to a country where I can do things my way. I suppose the government can't really resist the tide of where private investment wants to go, and hopefully by encouraging growth, it can then divvy out the spoils rather than stopping that growth in the first place.
You'd like to think so. I mean, if you're a company at the moment, you can choose to invest in biotech in particular, the life sciences. You can choose the clusters around Cambridge and Oxford because they're some of the best in the world. But if you can't get somewhere, then the other best in the world are the East Coast or West Coast of the US, and there's plenty of people looking to invest there as well. So the danger is that we keep on talking about us being a science superpower, and we keep on talking about our world-leading science, but we don't do the stuff that is needed to perpetuate that.
Well, Tom Whipple, thank you so much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Really appreciate your thoughts, as always. Science editor at The Times, of course. Now, just finally today, briefly onto one of those other departments. ESNES, as it's known, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. The new super ministry designed to expedite energy delivery with new infrastructure, connectivity, nuclear power stations, wind farms, oil and gas licences and all the rest of it. This jumbo department has been designed to streamline the process for delivering the stations to generate the power and the pylons to get it to our homes. A new one-stop shop to deliver the infrastructure we need to become more energy independent and less at risk from foreign wars or dodgy dictators. That's the plan. There is, however, a snag. This super ministry has not been given the control that seemed to be initially advertised. Yesterday afternoon, Number 10 confirmed to us that planning policy for energy infrastructure will not sit with Grant Shapps and his new ESNES, but instead will be kept with Michael Gove at the Levelling Up Department, DLUC. This revelation rather undermines the idea of a one-stop shop to streamline energy infrastructure delivery. Despite this restructuring of government being sold as a means to streamline government, ending that damaging interdepartmental bargaining and bickering, it's failed to do so. This fairly enormous oversight means that our new Energy Security Department is toothless. It can't get on and deliver energy security at all without the say-so of the bureaucrats at DLUC. Well, that's it for me today. Thank you for sticking with us. I'm actually back on Monday at 9:30. Tomorrow, Emily Carver will be sitting in. But up next, it's Bev Turner Today.
Hello, good morning. A touch of frost for some this morning, but less widespread across southern areas compared with recent mornings. Dry and bright for many, however, as we head into the afternoon, although showers will continue in the far north. A cold front has been crossing the UK during the last 24 hours. That brings cloudier skies and some outbreaks of rain and drizzle first thing. It does clear away, though. It's prevented a widespread frost, but behind that front, clearing skies and falling temperatures once again. Wales, northern England, for example, and to the north again, Scotland and Northern Ireland sees